Okay, so I thought I had the daunting task a while ago to summarize CIP 2 through 9 in one slide in 5 minutes. Now I've got, 8 minutes to do 8 slides, so we'll see how this goes. Let's just skip to the laughter on this one. I had some funny jokes to say. If you would just laugh, and then we'll go on. No, I didn't really. I'm going to just kind of zoom on a couple of them, but feel free to interrupt me as I'm going forward again, so we keep on track here. Compliance doesn't have to be painful. I actually had some points on this slide besides trying to be funny. There is help out there. Again, the group I work with, we can't help you become compliant necessarily. We're completely separate, but there are some great organizations. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how you find organizations here in a minute, how you find products, how you vet them and stuff. I guess I'll just jump right to the last one. It's NERC's brainchild. It's something that CIP is not. This is something that it was created. All of the whole concept of CIP was created through an ANSI process. And if you don't know this, I'm assuming everybody knows this, but it's created with industry input. And if you have ideas for CIP and you hear people complaining about it, then there are all kinds of formats forums where you can get involved and help to change it and make it better, because it is a work in progress. Your standards will never be static. Everybody says it's a moving target. Guess what? The threats are moving. If we had only one threat from this point on to deal with, we could someday have 100% security. But just like Leora said, there's no such thing as straight up perfect security unless you unplug the thing or air gap it or something. So if you're not required to comply, I guess this slide, my main point here was just that reduce risk of noncompliance is not really the goal. Reduce risk is the goal. Noncompliance does bear a penalty, and all this fear of $1 million a day per incident and stuff like that. It can stack up to really be devastating for somebody, but it's not the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario, if you've ever seen like the CNN special about Aurora taking out the power of the United States for a year and stuff like that, the worst case scenario gets a lot worse. It's like we all become Amish, at that point. This slide I actually was going to spend about 15 minutes on, so we'll just zoom through it. I'm going to let you. I got some good links on there. These type of things are the stuff that the team that I work for, the Tim Roxy and the group, we deal with this type of stuff. I mean, we're talking about are you at risk is the question. I mean, go to sciencenews.org. I don't get any money from them or anything, but go to some of these places and just search for electromagnetic weaponry. Search for solar flares. There are some really horrible doomsday scenarios, and everybody is at risk. Even if you don't work for an entity, I know there's a lot of people in the room that work for vendors and everything else, but everybody has to take this seriously, because the risk is not to, the bulk electric system. The risk is to civilization as we know it. There's a couple of fascinating ones. I was trying to kind of think in terms of risk beyond CIP, particularly in terms of smart grid. And there's some fascinating stuff out there, like the concept of the fourth bullet down, the scenario for a distributed denial of service. I guess they're looking at somewhere around 52 to 55 million smart meters, by 2015. Imagine having a botnet with a 25 million, 50 million, bots or zombies. Imagine there's not a network alive that could withstand that. Easter eggs in existence. That's back to that concept. That link I've got there for Wall Street Journal has got kind of a neat article about it's not necessarily particular to smart grid, but I had heard a rumor, and I saw a couple of blogs where people were talking about it, but I didn't have time to really spend adequate resources on it. But I had heard a rumor that some smart meters that have been delivered already, the firmware in them have malware on them. I have no idea if this is true. It's pretty fascinating, but I know that there are devices, not particularly related to the bulk electric system, but there are devices that have been delivered that do have malware on them. So even just the fact that we buy something and say, okay, we're going to treat this, handle this with kid gloves and really be careful with this, it could be infected the day you touch it. So are you at risk? Do you have a device? If you do, you're at risk, And then the last thing I threw out there was just the invasion of privacy kind of idea where, and this is one of the ones that's pretty common in just about any paranoid conversation you have about smart grid. If a person can hack your meter and could see your own electrical usage, you can see kind of the idea, hey, I can tell if you're home or not. Possibly if there's water involved, I can tell if you're in the shower or in some vulnerable position where if I'm an attacker, it's a good time to launch a physical attack. This was, the idea here is how far should I go? It's just like if you're ever, I like to play around with old cars. I've had a lot of muscle cars. And where do you stop when you're rebuilding a car? At what point do you say, okay, enough is enough. When I sell this thing, I'm already going to lose my shirt. Same kind of idea. How far do you protect? If you sit around a room with a bunch of people that are paranoid and you start saying, well, what about this? Here's another idea. What if that gets overridden? You could come up with scenario after scenario of paranoid delusions, basically. And where do you stop? I mean, when you run out of money, do you stop when your stock is at zero? So at what point do you stop? Well, the simple answer is whenever you've reduced all your risks to an acceptable level. So it sounds simple, but the idea behind it is, I just threw together some dumb project plan, in like 5 minutes. I just threw something up here. But the idea is if you look at the way I wrote it out or any project plan, you have to identify the risks early. So if your risks that you identify are directly related to CIP, then you're not going to have a very strong, robust security, posture. You have to think it back in terms, again, like I've said a couple times today, and I've heard a lot of other people talk about you have to think in terms of what are the risks to my company, what are my assets first. Look at what you have to lose, come back and try to figure out, different, one of these steps talks about design security controls. There in, October 11th, I don't know, I just threw some random date out there, but the idea is, after you identify what you have to lose, you stop and think about, okay, now there's a million different ways to protect this stuff. What's right for my scenario? And that kind of leads to the next slide, which is the whole, okay, so now it's time. I know what I've got to lose. I know how much money I have and everything else. Now I'm going to choose what security controls to put in place. How do I choose them? Dice, flip a coin, do I get the magic 8 ball, shake it up, do not put this one in. Unfortunately, a lot of people, including myself, especially in my earlier days, get like, what's a good word for it, feature fever. Like car salesmen understand this real well. It's like get them in and show them this really amazing GPS that's built in the dash. They don't even care what kind of engine you have. They care, got to have that GPS. So the idea is, I had so many vendors that came to me, and I know there's a lot of great vendors in here. I've met several of you, and this is nothing against you. This is against your competition probably, if anything. The idea is you've got to take the whole package, and you got to really think about the product. You don't say, wow, that's a great feature. I'm going to buy that product. Instead, what I said is define your constraints. How much money do you have to spend? Define the requirements for this supposed solution that you're going to put together. Create a scale. I used to drive people crazy because they would say, hey, I want you to go out and buy product XYZ, great vulnerability assessment product or a great IDS. And I would say, okay, is it a great one? How do you know it's a great one? Well, there's a bunch of great reviews. Okay, so there's great reviews, so I'm just supposed to go buy this? What problem are we trying to solve? And then they'd kind of look at me with this blank look. These are a lot of times where C-level executives looking at me like, well, of course we got a problem. Otherwise, this salesman wouldn't have come to me and told me I need to buy this. But they didn't stop and think about what is the real design. So, once you've created this a weighted scale, okay, now this idea is there's 5 different possibilities. Each one is going to look a little different than the other one. So create some kind of a metric that you can look at and rate them. What I always did was said, okay, once I figured out what my problem was and what the solution parameters were, I went into them and said, the most important thing is whatever. Maybe it was cost. The second most important thing is this, and I created a scale. So each of these questions, I actually would give a questionnaire to a vendor and say, please fill this out and send it back to a salesperson. Send this back to me. I'd let them go ahead and rate it themselves. And also it gave me a little insight into their honesty. Sometimes, they may rate it in a way that was different than I did. Seek your candidates, compare them empirically. It's never going to be truly empirical because there's always going to be, it could be something like I just like the way that the person shook my hand and looked me in the eye. That's a real person. These other people, I can't even hardly get a phone call back. There's a people factor that you can have to add in, and it may take away the empiricality or whatever that word would be. Demo is great. It's another thing that a lot of people don't do. They don't take that step and say, bring me this on site, or possibly a pilot project. bring me this tool. It's very complicated. It's something that a lot of vendors don't like to do, because they're in the process. They can't go and give you a product and let you play with it for a while, and then what are they going to do when it's all done? Or, plus you could rip it off. You could go and try to figure out, backwards engineer it or whatever. Leor, would you just give me 2 of these boxes to go play with for 6 months while I think about buying it? It gets complicated, doesn't it? Yeah? Okay. Since I'm from NERC right now. But if you can demo it, it goes a long way. Sometimes it has to be the kind of thing where you demo it on the web, you do a webinar, so at least you can see it in action. But if you can get your hands on it, and it gives you an idea of how sustainable the thing is. If it's something where you hear a great sales pitch, it seems like it meets all your needs, and you come up with a good plan to quantify and qualify this thing, you can afford it and everything else, but it's all theoretical because you've never really looked at how you can maintain it once you own it. It's another point I'm going to make in a minute. When you're done, whatever this solution, this security control you put in place needs to make your security posture stronger and not weaker, but sometimes it actually does the opposite. Create a maintenance plan, another crazy thing to think of, but how are you going to maintain it? You got to know that before you buy it. Identify risks with the vendors. If you're going down through here and you found a fantastic product and you would be in like their beta site because they've never sold one yet, you have to pull that out. It could be something that's worth doing. Maybe you're going to get a product that would normally be $1 million for free or for $10,000 or something since you're on the beta site. But the idea is, identify those kind of risks. Is the company going to be there in 5 years? If you're selecting a product that you think is going to last you 5 years, but you're looking at the writing on the wall and the company looks like they're just about to shut down, you got to kind of consider that. And lastly, I already mentioned pilot. I could spend a little while on this. The idea here is that there is help that can be had. NERC, is here to help. I know we've had a lot of jokes about that today, but the team that I'm with, you can contact, probably everybody in here has talked to Tim Roxy, I feel like, or you've heard his name. He's a great guy, and he'll help us. I know he's probably going to be watching this later, so I'm really trying to get a plug here to help my career, but no. Our group, like I've said before, we are somewhat air-gapped from compliance, and there are other teams within NERC that have nothing to do with compliance that can be a great help. If you do your homework and you vet consultancies, there's some fantastic consultancies out there. You got to be careful. I heard someone earlier today say, would that then make me compliant if a consultant came in and did a vulnerability assessment? And compliance, there's no silver bullet. Even if you've seemingly solved that one CIP requirement, you still have a lot of other issues. So don't fall into that. One product is going to make you compliant, or one vendor, you sign a contract with them and now you're compliant, unless they sell you compliance insurance or something like that. Peer entities, industry organizations, national laboratories, there's all kinds of other groups out there that can help. This is my bread and butter slide. The idea here, what we're talking about is that you've heard this culture of compliance probably, and every person that stood up here, I think, over the last day that I've been here has talked at some length at least about the whole shift, the paradigm shift, and we have to change the way that we think. And I guess I'll just start at the bottom of the pyramid. The transparency, it's something that the culture where we bury weaknesses doesn't work anymore. If a person feels like they can't be transparent, they can't go and say, hey, I've got a problem, then there's going to be a bigger problem. Here we are also in an industry where there's 20% of the people are going to retire in the next 5 years or something crazy. I can't remember the exact number, but that presents a problem. There has to be transparency in an organization. Accountability, the whole reason we're where we are today with cybersecurity is not a technology issue, it's a people issue, right? It's not that, technology is inherently insecure. It's not, it's people. People are insecure. People that write the code maybe, the people that maintain it, the people that try to break into it or whatever. So accountability in an organization is key. I'd mentioned a while ago about creating an organizational hierarchy where people have visibility all the way to the CEO level. And that's the only way to provide accountability. The traditional model of having a CIO and a whole IT organization, and they are the only ones that have the keys, and nobody even can see what they do. that can't be a compliant model, and it really can't be secure at all. Pragmatic security initiatives, I threw that out there. If people are incented to not perform or to not be secure, then how are we ever going to expect them to be secure? As it is, if my boss never hears from me except for good news all the time, they start developing this, wow, he must be doing a great job. But if we have to switch that where people that uncover vulnerabilities get incentives somehow. I know I used to be in the Air Force, and I know that there were programs back then for finding the $5 million hammer. The person that finds that gets recognition, even cash. So I don't know exactly how that works out in this type of scenario, but there's got to be some incentives. Relationships, that speaks for itself, whether it be relationships with external organizations or within your organization. Rarely in electrical utilities have I ever seen a place where there was one IT shop. It seems like there's power plant IT kind of people. There's people, and maybe even you got water, you got, on the customer service side, you got business separated a little bit from SCADA. So you have to have those relationships so that you have a trust where people will come to you and say, I've got a problem. I don't know how to secure this. Help me out. Independent review, I can't stress that, too much. I mean, you have to be able to have somebody that gains, like the whole hostile witness idea. If somebody gets money or they get bonuses because they were able to uncover vulnerabilities or break in to your systems using ethical hacking kind of ideas, then, what better way to validate your systems? SDLC, this one is, I don't know if, I would hope everybody's heard of this whole concept, but security has to get plugged in at the earliest levels of every project. If you try to say, okay, once we, create some new software or we procure some software, then we'll hand it off to IT security folks and let them figure out how to secure it. That's a bad deal. And unfortunately, that still goes on today. I know that. So we have to switch that where when you're talking about defining the problem, before you even are defining requirements, you get security involved and say, okay, it very well could be leaving the problem is more secure. You have to start at the very earliest levels. Safe zone, I've already talked about this about 10 times, but the idea that somebody feels safe to blow the whistle, even on their CEO. I don't know how you do that again. There's got to be a way, but, I remember a general that got a ticket from a airman first class that was a guard at a base, and I think I was in Japan, Yokota Air Force Base, and this general was coming onto the base, and this poor, little 19-year-old, shaking knees, like, what am I going to do? And the general pulls up and said, sorry, I don't have my ID with me. And he said, I'm sorry, I can't let you on the base. And he went on and on and on and argued with him. And the general ended up, from what I remember, he actually went past the kid and started getting onto the base, and the kid had to pull his gun and everything. And the kid got a promotion out of the deal. Got out of cycle. That's how it has to be. You have to have some sort of a way to give people an incentive and not make them fear for their jobs. Language, customs, and norms, the whole idea of culture really is tied up in those three things. It has to permeate our culture, I guess is what I was going to say there. You remember, it hasn't been that long ago that we didn't ever buckle our seatbelts. But now I can't even imagine stepping into a car and not buckling my seatbelt. It's just such a part of me because they had this huge campaign. There was buckle up, it saves your life and everything. For years I sit there and watch those billboards, and now it's just a part of what we do. And lastly, the whole idea of starting from the top, again, that speaks to itself. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So that's like the whole, we were non-compliant otherwise, right? So again, it has to start from the top down. I think everything I've already said to this point builds to that. If you're a CEO, you happen to be in this room, and you talk about this to your people, or if you're on the some sort of an executive role, and it's talked about openly, people hear security, and it gets pounded in their head, then everybody will think security, because it's everybody's job. It's not the CEO's job, and it's not IT security. It's not the compliance people. It's everybody's job in a group. All right, how was that? I still have some time for questions, or? All right. Somebody has a question. I just know it. Okay, Jim. Yeah. Great. Well, the whole concept, yeah. Well, if the executives started wearing knit ties, those little skinny ones we used to wear in the 80s and stuff, then everybody would wear them eventually in the whole group. So same idea. They're speaking security. They're talking security language, and the lowest level people that are hoping someday to be an executive, they're emulating that. I think it's a gigantic step forward.